What happens when a reclusive tech visionary obsessed with perfection crosses paths with a homeless cellist who hears the world through rhythm and silence? In the heart of rain-soaked Seattle, a quiet encounter at a public AR showcase sets off a chain of events neither of them could have predicted, pulling them into a journey of emotion, memory, and the invisible fractures beneath what we call reality. Secrets unfold, worlds collide, and somewhere between broken soundscapes and imperfect music, something real begins to emerge. This is not just a story about technology or survival. It is about what we choose to feel and what we're most afraid to hear. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow the unfolding of a drama unlike anything you've seen before. Some silences change everything. Seattle had always worn its rain like a second skin, never violent, never loud, just a constant, whispering presence. On this particular morning, the mist draped itself across the skyline like gauze, softening the edges of towering glass monoliths that pierced through the clouds. The streets below pulsed with quiet energy. Sleek electric cars hummed past on wet pavement, their reflections stretching like ribbons across puddles, while drones flitted between rooftops, delivering packages to people who rarely looked up from their augmented lives. In the heart of downtown, where the chrome skeletons of new skyscrapers rose like monuments to ambition, the world moved at a rhythm dictated by innovation. Holographic advertisements rippled along building facades. Smart kiosks greeted passers-by by name. Pedestrians, faces lit by data glow from their glasses and devices, drifted forward like ghosts with somewhere important to be. But not far from all this curated precision, the city told a different story. Beneath the overpasses, in forgotten alleyways where the rain pooled dark and slow, life took on a rawer rhythm. Blankets lay bundled in corners like wilted flowers. Steam rose from sewer grates, masking the low murmur of voices and the occasional cough that broke the quiet like a torn string in a symphony. It was here, in the space between two worlds, that people like Clara Bellwether moved quietly, unseen. She crossed a cracked sidewalk with Finn tucked close beside her, one hand resting on the back of his small shoulder. His sneakers were damp, the laces trailing. He was humming softly to himself, something tuneless but intentional, like he was keeping time with the city. Clara noticed everything, the shift in light as a bus passed, the rhythm of drops against metal, the low creak of a sign swinging overhead. Her mind translated these into textures, movements, harmonies. It was a habit she could not turn off, even if it no longer had a stage to live on. They stopped at a crosswalk. A group of tech executives passed behind them, laughing too loudly into headsets, their tailored coats untouched by rain. One of them glanced briefly at Clara, just long enough to register the frayed sleeves of her jacket, before his gaze slid away, uninterested. Clara exhaled, slow and steady. Finn looked up at her. "Did you hear it?" he asked. "Hear what?" she replied, brushing a wet curl from his forehead. "The streetlight," he said. "It buzzed in B-flat." Clara smiled, and though it barely touched her lips, something in her posture softened. "Close, more like an A that's just a little flat," she said. Finn grinned and nodded. "I almost got it." The light changed, they walked on. Behind them the city hummed its dual melodies, one composed of code, profit margins, and predictive algorithms, the other of unwashed sidewalks, forgotten dreams, and small, stubborn acts of survival. The rain fell on both equally, without judgment. The van was parked beneath the shadow of an old concrete overpass, its tires nestled against the curb as though trying not to draw attention. Faded paint peeled from its sides, and one of the back windows had been replaced with duct tape and plastic. From the outside, it looked like it belonged to no one and everyone, a temporary vessel adrift in the city's blind spot. Inside, it smelled faintly of old paper, wet wool, and something sweet. Maybe the crushed apple Finn had hidden in his coat pocket 2 days before. A curtain, fashioned from an old sheet, separated the front seats from the sleeping space in the back. There, layered with thrifted blankets and second-hand pillows, Clara and Finn had built their small world. A lantern hung from a hook above them, casting a golden pool of light across a dog-eared copy of The Secret Garden, an empty thermos, and a worn sketchbook filled with Finn's careful crayon renderings of trees, trains, and what he imagined Mars might look like. Finn lay on his stomach, humming softly as he colored. Clara sat cross-legged beside him, patching a hole in the sleeve of his jacket with a needle so small it pricked her fingers twice before she could thread it. "We'll find you a warmer one soon," she said without looking up. "I like this one," Finn murmured. "It's soft, it smells like you." Clara paused for a second, her mouth tightening slightly, then continued sewing. "Then I'll patch it better." It was not the kind of life she had imagined. Not when she stood in the conservatory's practice room at 22, eyes closed as the cello's voice filled the air like breath, believing she was destined to be heard. Not when she played Debussy under the cathedral dome, her fingers fluid, the world silent with awe. But life had shifted without asking her permission, first slowly, then all at once. A lost scholarship after her father's death. A rushed marriage to a man whose promises evaporated with Finn's first fever. Then the layoffs, the eviction notice, and finally the quiet surrender of her cello to the pawnshop on 3rd and Bell. Some nights she dreamt of the bow in her hand, of the wooden body pressed against her chest like a heartbeat. She woke with her fingers curled as if still holding it. But even in silence, Clara taught Finn to listen, not just with his ears but with the whole of himself. She showed him how to hear the city not as noise but as music, the syncopation of crosswalk beeps, the harmonic interval between footsteps and rain, the rhythm of tires on wet asphalt. One evening, as they sat in the front seats watching the drizzle blur the world outside, Finn leaned against her shoulder and whispered, "Do you think people forget to listen when they're warm all the time?" Clara looked down at him, surprised by the question's weight. She brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. "Some do," she said, "but not everyone." Finn thought about that for a moment. "I think the rain sounds like a lullaby today," he said. Clara rested her head lightly atop his and closed her eyes. "It does," she whispered. "It really does." The bell above the pawnshop door chimed with a thin, metallic sound as Clara stepped inside, clutching her coat tighter around her ribs. The warmth in the shop was stale and electric, the air saturated with dust, solder, and the faint twang of old guitar strings. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like flies caught between glass. Finn was not with her today. She had left him with a trusted vendor at the farmer's market, a woman who saved bruised fruit for them in paper bags and told stories in Spanish. Clara moved slowly past shelves of mismatched electronics, stacks of scratched DVDs, and jewelry trays that glittered dully under the glass. She was not here to buy anything. She never was. Near the back, past the wall of instruments that leaned like weary soldiers, guitars, violins, a trumpet with a dented bell, was the cello. It stood behind a locked cabinet, its varnished wood dimmed by time and dust, but still whole, still upright, like it remembered what it meant to be beautiful. The bow lay across its strings like an afterthought, stripped of intent. A white tag dangled from one of the tuning pegs. Her name was not on it, but she could still feel her fingerprints inside its grain. She did not touch the glass. The shopkeeper, a broad man with red-rimmed eyes and a crossword puzzle folded in his hands, looked up from the counter. He recognized her. He always did. "Still here," he said, as if that were comfort. "I know," Clara answered. Her voice was quiet, steady, but inside her chest something flinched. For a moment she saw herself 5 years ago, standing on a stage in an old theater with cracked velvet seats. The world was quiet, listening. Her cello had breath then, filling every corner of the hall. The bow danced. The notes shimmered like rain on water. Applause had come after, but she had not needed it. The music had been enough. Then came the call. The one that told her father had collapsed in the kitchen, fingers still curled around a paring knife, dinner half prepared. Clara had left everything behind that night: the concert, the conservatory, her planned audition in Chicago. She flew home, sat through the funeral, buried her mother's silence alongside his grave. The world narrowed. Music faded. She sold her bow first, then the case. She pawned the cello last, believing she would come back for it in a month. A month became 2, then a year. Then she stopped marking time. Now she only visited. "Want me to open it for you?" the shopkeeper offered, softer this time. Clara shook her head. "No," she said, "not today." She stood a little longer, her breath fogging the glass just slightly. Then she turned and walked back into the rain. The cello remained behind, its body curved like a memory of something sacred, a relic of a life paused but not forgotten. Not yet. Elias Thorne lived in a high-rise that seemed more like a sealed laboratory than a home. The building towered above Elliott Bay, its windows coated in a sheen that reflected the sky so completely that on overcast days it vanished into the clouds. From the street, no one would have guessed a person lived there at all. It looked like a server hub, or a prototype for some government facility never meant to be touched by human hands. Inside, silence reigned. Elias sat in a low leather chair, barefoot, with a neural interface band clamped lightly across his temples. His eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids as scenes unfolded inside his mind. A simulated waterfall scattering light in iridescent arcs, a creature unfurling its wings mid-leap, shadows that responded to the user's breath. Around him, the room was a symphony of clean lines and motion-activated surfaces. A wall-sized display flickered with code and data streams. An espresso machine in the corner had not been used in months. Plants were digitally projected, programmed to change with the seasons. He ended the session with a blink. The room dimmed as the holograms dissolved. He rubbed his eyes, his fingers lingering at the bridge of his nose, not with weariness but irritation. Something was still off in the build. The wind simulation in the forest scene lagged by half a second against the particle spread of leaves. That was not acceptable. Perfection was not a goal for Elias, it was the floor. He stood and walked barefoot across the heated floor to the workstation. A cluster of digital assistants hovered near his shoulder, waiting for voice command. Instead, Elias typed, fingers flying across a projected keyboard that only he could see. He trusted his hands more than his voice. Voice could tremble, hands were precise. His team rarely saw him in person. Communication was routed through internal messages, voice filters, avatars that mimicked his presence but softened his oddness. He did not do interviews, did not attend product launches. If his name appeared in the press, it was always in passive voice. Elias Thorne, founder of Nexus Games, was credited with, as though he were an idea rather than a man. But he was very much a man. He ate, though erratically, slept, though often in short, shallow stretches. And though no one would have believed it, Elias felt deeply, just not in the ways most people understood. He felt beauty in symmetry, in precision, in the exactness of a thing done correctly. He found music not in sonatas but in how one data stream harmonized with another. Emotions were uncomfortable, loud, disorganized. He did not trust them. When he looked out the floor-to-ceiling window, the city below was divided. Order versus chaos, signal versus noise. He preferred to stay above it, to create worlds where the unpredictable could be mapped, measured, refined. Yet lately, even inside his simulations, something was missing. A dissonance, a flatness he could not code away. A sense that, despite the visual brilliance and the faultless mechanics, the experiences he built did not feel, not truly. He had created environments of breathtaking scale, ecosystems that evolved on their own, even entire artificial cultures. But what he could not generate was the ineffable. It haunted him quietly. So he dove deeper, locked the world outside behind retina-scanning doors, and returned to the project that had no name. The one he worked on alone, without telling anyone. The one he hoped might finally contain it. The flaw, the ache, the human core he had never managed to simulate. The air at Pike Place Market shimmered with light and anticipation. Nexus Games had transformed the familiar square into a living stage of augmented spectacle. Rain fell as always, but above the crowd, brilliant visuals danced across the glass facade of the Lexington building, a towering screen alive with color, scale, and motion. Creatures conjured from imagination leapt across simulated cliffs. A dragon curled itself around the building's spine, its translucent wings flexing against the Seattle sky, refracting light like crystal. The crowd, drawn by the promise of technological magic, stood huddled beneath umbrellas or let the rain soak their shoulders without protest. Phones were lifted, children perched on shoulders, and everywhere was the soft gasp of wonder. Clara stood near the back, her coat clinging to her frame, one hand resting protectively on Finn's head. She had not meant to be here. They had wandered through the market looking for day-old bread and warm soup samples, seeking shelter from the drizzle. But when Finn had heard the humming of the amplifiers and caught sight of the crowd, he tugged her forward with quiet insistence. They stood now in the periphery, half sheltered beneath a food cart awning, watching the world shift into spectacle. Clara did not fully understand what she was seeing. She had no augmented headset, no retinal link to the system. Yet even from a distance the illusion was mesmerizing. The dragon's scales gleamed with impossible detail. The sound, immense, resonant, shook the pavement as the beast landed with a thunderous, slow-motion grace. Flames licked the virtual sky, accompanied by a deep, guttural roar. Finn stared wide-eyed but not in awe. He tilted his head. "Do you hear that?" he asked. Clara glanced down. The roar. "No, the wings," he said. "They're wrong." She watched as the dragon lifted off again, its wings beating in great, deliberate strokes. The roar came half a breath later, as if the creature had exhaled too late. To Clara, it was a beautiful display. To Finn, something had been dislodged from the rhythm. "Shouldn't it roar as it lifts?" he murmured. "Like a cello bow, you pull and the sound comes right away, not after." Clara looked again, more closely now. She noticed it, the delay. Subtle, perhaps half a second, but present. A missed beat. A visual and auditory discord that the brain might overlook but the body could feel, like a musician hearing a note out of time. She hesitated. This was not her world. She had nothing to do with Nexus or dragons or whatever sorcery created these illusions. But Finn's brow was furrowed and his hand gripped her sleeve. It was not just curiosity. It was recognition. He felt it. So she moved through the edge of the crowd and approached a young man wearing a black Nexus badge. His headset flickered with data, and his fingers tapped at a console mounted to his wrist. "I'm sorry to bother you," Clara said, brushing wet hair from her face. "But I think there's something slightly off in the synchronization." The technician barely looked up. "The what?" "The dragon," she said. "Its wings and its roar. They're not aligned, just slightly." He blinked. "You noticed that?" "It was my son, actually." The man frowned, tapped something on his console, then looked up again, more alert this time. "Wait here." Clara did not expect anything more. Maybe a polite nod. But within seconds, she noticed a shift. Two more technicians checking devices, murmuring. A tall woman with a headset adjusted her earpiece, then turned to face one of the many discrete cameras nestled into the light rigs above the square. Somewhere far away, a screen flickered. A man watching from a high-rise apartment leaned forward, eyes narrowing. For the first time in hours, Elias Thorne felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest, curiosity. The dragon circled once more, its immense wings slicing the air with an elegant rhythm, each stroke perfectly modeled, each shadow precisely cast. But when it roared, the sound lagged again, half a beat too late, like an echo that arrived before the cry itself. Finn squinted at the sky, his face scrunched in concentration. He tugged gently at Clara's sleeve. "Mama," he said softly, "the sound is wrong again. The wings go first, then the roar, but it should be together, Like when you pull the bow across the string, it has to happen at the same time. Clara looked at him, unsure. The words were simple, but his tone was exact, certain, like a conductor hearing an orchestra fall just slightly out of time. She followed his gaze back to the dragon as it swooped low, tail slicing across the digital clouds. The delay was almost imperceptible to her now. Almost. "I think you're right," she murmured. She stood still for a moment, rain tickling her scalp beneath the frayed hood of her coat. This was not her world. She was not an engineer, not a developer, not even someone with a working phone. The closest she had been to this kind of technology was watching old science fiction films at the public library with Finn. And yet, she had once trained her ear to catch the microsecond timing of a crescendo, had once tuned her cello strings by instinct, by breath alone. She trusted rhythm the way others trusted vision. But what was she supposed to do? Walk up to a crowd of tech professionals and suggest that her 7-year-old son had noticed something they missed? She started to shake her head, but Finn tugged her arm again, a little harder this time. "Mama," he said, "you always tell me to speak up when I hear something that sounds wrong." Clara's breath caught. He was right. She had told him that again and again, because in a world that often ignored soft voices, she wanted his to stay intact. "Stay right here," she said. She wove her way toward one of the event technicians, a young man in a branded jacket, staring into a tablet mounted to his forearm. His fingers moved constantly, adjusting settings, fielding messages, eyes never straying from the data feed. "Excuse me," Clara said, tentative. "I think there's a small timing issue with the display." He barely turned. "Display?" "The dragon," she said. "The wings and the roar, they're out of sync." The technician gave a short, distracted laugh, not unkind but clearly expecting to brush her off. "Latency from some devices is normal, ma'am." "It is not the devices," she said, more firmly now. "It is the master sync. The delay is very slight, but it is present in the projection itself, not in individual headset latency." That made him pause. Clara pressed on, her voice steadier than she expected. "The wings beat and the sound comes just a moment after. My son noticed it first. He's unusually sensitive to rhythm." The technician looked at her now, really looked, then tapped something on his screen. "Wait a second." He pressed his earpiece and muttered something under his breath. Another technician approached from the left. They conferred briefly, and then both looked up toward the projection. Clara stepped back, unsure whether to feel foolish or relieved. She did not expect anything to come of it. But then the second technician turned slightly, his voice low into his headset. "Possible sync issue flagged by spectator. Confirming dragon sound alignment with motion track, rerouting live stream." Up above, the dragon banked again, vanishing momentarily into digital fog. Across the city, high above it all, Elias Thorne's eyes narrowed. A series of diagnostics had just lit up his wall display. Someone had flagged a potential timing flaw in a sequence that had passed dozens of beta tests and technical inspections. The alert came from a junior staffer at the event, citing a report by a civilian. The log entry was brief. Reported by civilian observer. Witness, child estimated age 7. Observation: the dragon's wings and roar are out of sync. Elias stared at the line of text for several seconds. Then he stood. The room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of Elias' interface wall. Lines of code streamed silently, reflecting in his eyes like water catching firelight. Across the glass, a dozen live feeds flickered, angles from drones circling Pike Place, AR telemetry maps, real-time audience biometrics. Every frame had been optimized, every movement tracked. To Elias, it was not spectacle. It was structure, pattern, symmetry. Until something unexpected slipped through the cracks. He stood motionless, hands at his sides, studying the anomaly on screen. A flagged line of dialogue, pulled from the event logs, blinked in the corner of his vision. Observation: the dragon's wings and roar are out of sync. It had not come from the QA team, not from a developer. It had come from a child who had no headset, no access to the dev stream, no device, just his eyes and ears. Elias tapped a command into the air. A playback hovered in front of him, the dragon circling, flaring its wings, unleashing a roar that arrived just a breath too late, barely noticeable, technically within margin, but the child had caught it. More precisely, he had felt it. Elias leaned forward, fingers pressed together in front of his mouth. His mind ran a series of calculations, not of numbers but of probabilities. For someone, let alone a child, to detect a latency issue invisible to professionals required something he could not quantify, something outside algorithmic logic. He did not like the feeling that crept in, something between fascination and disquiet. It was the same sensation he had felt as a boy when he disassembled a metronome and realized he did not understand why its ticks made him feel calm. He gave a single command aloud. Pull identity. The system complied instantly. A side panel slid into view. No digital signature, no purchase record. The observers were not logged into any Nexus device. Only a brief visual. A woman in a worn coat, her arm wrapped around a boy with sharp eyes and tangled hair. No facial recognition match for the woman. No stored biometric for the child. Unregistered, invisible to the machine. Elias stared at their image for a long time, his eyes catching on the woman's face, tired but focused, turned slightly toward the boy with a kind of quiet alertness. Protective but not fearful. A musician's posture, a mother's presence. There was something in the angle of her gaze that made Elias pause. He said nothing more. He did not notify his staff, did not summon his handlers. He simply removed the neural band from his head, crossed to a wall panel, and retrieved his coat, a long black one he rarely wore except when he knew he would be seen. Moments later, the glass doors of the tower slid open and Elias Thorne stepped into the rain. Alone. He walked without an umbrella. The downpour beaded on his coat and hair, soaked into the collar of his shirt. People did not recognize him. He was not a face people knew. His presence did not match the holograms or the investor portraits. He moved like someone used to being unseen. As he reached the edge of Pike Place, the crowd parted slightly, still fixed on the spectacle above. Elias scanned the street level, searching not for the dragon, but for the anomaly hidden among the ordinary. A whisper, overlooked by engineers and executives alike, had reached the highest tower in the city. And for the first time in years, Elias Thorne decided to listen with more than code. The crowd had begun to thin, its attention dimming now that the dragon had completed its aerial ballet. Rain clung to the air like silk thread, catching in coat folds and hairlines, weaving people together and apart. Clara reached for Finn's hand, ready to guide him away from the fading lights, when she noticed the man watching them. He stood several steps back, tall and angular with a posture too still to be casual. His coat, black and structured, was soaked through at the shoulders. His hands were buried awkwardly in the pockets, not in comfort but as though unsure what to do with them. His gaze flicked between her and Finn, not impolite, not invasive, but intensely focused. Clara's body tightened instinctively, the reflex of a mother too long on alert. Then he moved forward. "Hello," he said. His voice was soft but clipped, every syllable wrapped in hesitation, like it had been practiced before he said it aloud. He looked at Clara only briefly before his eyes settled on Finn. "You said something," he continued, "about the dragon, about the rhythm." Clara stepped subtly in front of Finn. "Who are you?" He blinked, caught between thought and response. Elias Thorne." The name hung in the air for a beat too long. Clara's brow furrowed. Finn looked up at him, curious, not fearful. "I work on things," Elias added unhelpfully. "This was one of them." You mean the dragon? Finn asked. Elias nodded. Clara watched the exchange, her instincts still cautious, but something about the man's energy struck her, not threatening, not calculating. He looked unpracticed, as though he was used to being somewhere else entirely and had only just remembered how to be human. I was watching from a remote feed, Elias said, still speaking to Finn. We received feedback that there was something off. You noticed it. Finn gave a small shrug. Yeah, it sounded wrong. What sounded wrong exactly? Finn frowned, searching for the right words. Then, with the certainty of a child who does not doubt what he knows, he said, "The wings and the roar didn't match. It was out of rhythm, like playing music wrong, when the movement and the sound don't hold hands." Elias said nothing for a moment. His fingers twitched slightly at his sides. Clara watched him with narrowed eyes. "You really work on this?" He nodded again. "And someone told you what he said?" "Yes." "And you came all the way out here to ask about that?" A pause. "Yes." She blinked, unsure whether to find that unsettling or impressive. Elias seemed to read her uncertainty and stepped back slightly, not out of fear, but something that resembled respect. "I do not usually come to these things," he said. "I am not good at—" He gestured vaguely at the people, the noise, the weather. "But what he said, I have not heard it said like that, not by anyone I work with." Finn looked up at his mother. "Did I say something wrong?" Clara bent down beside him. "No, sweetheart, you said something true." Elias' gaze lingered on both of them. A woman whose voice carried no title, and a child who heard in patterns what others only saw in spectacle. They did not fit here, not in the clean design of his world. And yet, something about their presence made the code in his mind pause, made the edges soften just enough to let sound in. "I do not mean to intrude," he said quietly, "but if you have a few minutes, I would like to ask you both something." Clara tilted her head, her voice cautious. "What kind of something?" Elias hesitated. "Something I cannot ask anyone else." They sat on the edge of the plaza beneath an overhang of concrete and ivy, where the sound of the rain was steady and close. The crowd had all but vanished. The digital dragon retired to its server, the spectacle folded away like a stage curtain. A damp hush lingered in its place. Elias stood awkwardly across from Clara and Finn, his coat dripping, the hem soaked where it brushed his shoes. He looked as though he might vanish at any moment, like he belonged more in data streams than physical space. Clara kept Finn close beside her, one arm looped loosely around his shoulders. Finn leaned against her side, quiet but attentive, eyes never leaving Elias. "I have been trying to solve something for a long time," Elias began, not looking at them but instead at the wet ground near his feet. "We build worlds, detailed, vast, believable in every measurable way, but they are hollow, technically perfect, but without something I cannot define." He paused, as if waiting for the correct language to arrive. "Emotion has parameters," he continued. "Music, motion, timing, resonance, they can be measured, but they cannot be made to feel real unless something beneath them understands what real is. Today, when your son noticed the flaw, it was not just a technical observation. It was something else. He felt the rhythm break." Clara's gaze remained steady, though she said nothing. Elias looked up now directly at her. His voice, when he spoke again, was quieter. "Most of my colleagues would not have noticed. Some would have dismissed it, but you did not, and neither did he." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small, water-resistant tablet. With a flick, he brought up an interface Clara did not recognize. A developer view, streaming live performance data, sound curves, alignment metrics, and one glowing note in the margin. Anomaly reported external civilian input. It had already been flagged as valuable. "I want to ask if you would consider something," Elias said. "A consulting role. Informal at first. No technical expectations. No coding. I am not looking for another engineer." "What are you looking for?" Clara asked. "Someone who listens the way you do, who hears what is missing." The rain continued to fall in a soft, percussive rhythm against the stone. Clara blinked, unsure if she was being mocked or recruited. "You want to hire me," she said slowly, "to what? Feel things?" Elias nodded, surprisingly earnest. "To help others feel things. We call it immersion, but most of what we build is noise without rhythm, noise without breath. You have breath." He glanced at Finn, "has breath and clarity." Finn perked up slightly, like a junior helper. Elias turned to him. "Yes, exactly, a junior observer, if that is something you would want." Finn's eyes lit up, not with ambition but with something purer, recognition. He was being seen not as a child tagging along, but as someone whose way of noticing things mattered. Clara hesitated. "We're not part of your world. We do not have credentials, or a place to live that doesn't move every night." Elias did not flinch. "That is irrelevant. I can arrange housing. Private, discreet, near the development labs. You would not be monitored. You would not owe anything." Clara narrowed her eyes. "Why us?" "Because no one else has ever shown me the one thing I cannot build," Elias said. "Instinct, imperfection, rhythm." There was no charm in his voice, no performance, just a quiet desperation dressed in logic. Clara looked down at Finn, who was watching the rain pool into a small gutter, his fingers tracing soundless beats on his knee. She thought of the cello, of the silence it left behind, of this strange man who seemed incapable of speaking plainly and yet somehow had heard them better than most. She did not say yes, but she did not say no. The Nexus Development Wing did not look like an office. It felt more like the inside of a spaceship, glass panels that lit up underfoot, walls that shifted opacity depending on movement, surfaces that shimmered with ambient code. Everything was polished, quiet, and sterile, as though creativity itself had been sanitized into submission. Clara stepped through the sliding entrance, her worn boots making a soft scuff against the pristine floor. She wore the cleanest coat she owned, hair tied back in a way that felt almost formal but not quite forced. Finn walked just ahead of her, eyes wide, spinning slowly as he took in the glowing corridors, the magnetic whiteboards filled with equations he could not yet read. "This place is like a dream where no one sleeps," he whispered. Their guide, a young assistant named Marta, offered a polite smile but kept her tone brisk. "You'll have access to level 2 only for now. Testing rooms, sound studios, and the observation garden. Housing keycards were delivered this morning. Meals are scheduled but optional. Anything else, ask the system." Clara nodded once. She had no questions, not yet. Inside the testing hall, a curved projection screen the size of a theater wall played simulations on loop, storm-churned oceans, alien cityscapes, forests lit with shifting bioluminescence. A technician stood at a console, calibrating wind simulations down to fractions of a second. He barely acknowledged them. Clara watched for a moment, arms crossed, before speaking. "The wind's too symmetrical, it loops." The technician blinked, startled. "It what?" She nodded toward the screen. "It repeats with the same cadence every 12 seconds. Wind doesn't breathe like that." He opened his mouth to defend it but said nothing. The loop became obvious now that she had said it. The illusion had cracked. Later that afternoon, Clara was led to a lab where prototype audio was being mapped to movement, footsteps in gravel, cloth brushing skin, laughter caught in echoes. The room was filled with specialists and sound designers, heads buried in data. Clara stood in the back, listening. "May I try something?" she asked. They handed her a headset, curious but distant. She closed her eyes, listened to the emotional emptiness in a scene meant to portray loss. A woman crying beside a hospital bed, perfect graphics, faultless lighting, but no weight. She asked for a metronome. They gave her one. She slowed it down, shifted the pace of the audio slightly, then suggested layering in a single, sustained low cello note, not melody, just resonance. They tried it, the scene changed. No one spoke, but a few engineers looked up from their monitors. Finn, meanwhile, had discovered a quiet corner in the garden corridor, where artificial light filtered through a ceiling designed to mimic shifting daylight. He traced patterns in the floor's temperature-sensitive tiles and laughed softly when they changed color beneath his shoes. Marta passed by and raised an eyebrow. "He's not bothering anyone," Clara said. "He's fine," Marta replied, almost surprised. "Actually, he just asked the ambient system why the birdsong sounds like it's on a loop. No one else noticed." That night in the small apartment assigned to them, Clara sat at the kitchenette table while Finn drew what he remembered from the day: trees made of light, chairs that moved when you stared too long, a hallway that hummed in D major. Clara looked out the window. The rain had followed them here too, smearing itself across the glass in long, thoughtful streaks. She still did not know what Elias truly wanted from her, but for the first time in years, she felt like the rhythm was shifting. And it was not just noise. The first few days were met with polite skepticism. Clara knew the looks, the barely concealed glances between engineers when she entered a room, the way her observations were noted but rarely implemented, the silent assumption that she was there as some kind of experiment, a gesture from Elias that would quietly fade. But she was used to silence. She knew how to listen through it. Her impact began with something small. In a VR scene simulating a child's bedroom during a thunderstorm, the rain was technically flawless: randomized droplet patterns, spatial audio synced to window panes. But to Clara, it felt clinical, hollow. "Rain does not sound the same when you are lonely," she said softly to the lead audio designer. He looked at her, unsure whether to be amused or curious. "Rain is rain." "No," she replied. "Sometimes it sounds like home, sometimes like goodbye, sometimes like nothing at all." She asked to try something. They gave her 5 minutes. She changed the frequency slightly, shifted the rhythm to mimic the scattered irregularity of rain on a metal rooftop, then layered it with the faintest echo of a human breath, a detail so subtle it bordered on subconscious. They tested the scene again. Someone in the room exhaled sharply and whispered, "That feels like remembering." After that, the engineers listened differently. She began to shape avatars, not with new code but with insight into human pause. She noticed how most digital characters moved too cleanly, too predictably. No hesitation, no nervous weight shifting, no flicker of doubt in the eyes before they spoke. Even grief was animated with composure. Clara sat with the design team and asked them to try again. Let this character not know what to say. Let her take too long. Let her voice catch halfway through a sentence. They re-rendered the model. A woman in a field trying to speak the name of someone she had lost. The silence between her words said more than the words themselves. Clara's presence became less of an oddity. Her input was no longer footnoted. It began appearing in core development documents, marked as emotive anchors. She did not always have the vocabulary the programmers used, but she spoke a language that bypassed code. Emotion, rhythm, breath. Elias watched all of this from a quiet distance. He did not interfere. He did not offer praise, but he began adjusting internal processes to make space for her suggestions. In private memos, he flagged Clara's edits as nonlinear logic triggers, a new category in their system, one that could not be predicted or quantified, only observed and felt. Finn, too, became a fixture. Staff would find him walking through testing rooms, tapping walls, asking why the color green felt too sharp, or suggesting that the robots should look like they had a favorite song. No one dismissed him anymore. At night, Clara began to bring out her hands again, not to work but to move. She traced invisible notes in the air, imagined melodies for places that had none. She still could not play. The cello remained locked in the pawnshop. But she was hearing music again, not from an instrument, from within, and from a world slowly learning to listen back. Elias had never been one for watching people. Observation in his world was meant for systems, code running across a screen, data points aligning neatly into patterns, behavioral matrices he could chart and modify. But now he found himself watching Clara. Not deliberately, not intrusively, more like gravity pulling attention toward a center he had not known existed. She moved differently from everyone else in the building. While his staff buzzed in efficient trajectories, precise, goal-oriented, consumed by metrics, Clara moved with a kind of thoughtful hesitation, as though listening to a rhythm only she could hear. She paused in places others hurried through. She asked questions with no immediate utility. She noticed shadows that were not flaws but features. In the central studio one afternoon, Elia stood just beyond the doorway, watching Clara as she adjusted the movement of a simulated character walking through snow. The snow itself had been calibrated for realism, density, sound compression, step resistance. But something in the scene felt too crisp, too deliberate. "It's too even," Clara said to the designer. "Have the left boot sink deeper, as if he's tired or carrying something. Let the snow break imperfectly under him." The change was minor, hardly noticeable in the stream of code Elias reviewed later that night. But when the scene played back, it felt truer. Not because it looked more real, but because it felt more human. He began taking quieter routes through the lab, not to avoid his staff, but to catch Clara mid-thought, mid-sentence. Once, he passed by a conference room and paused when he saw her alone inside, standing in front of a soundwave display. Her hand hovered just above the graph, not touching but shaping the silence as though sculpting air. Later he found the sound she had adjusted, a breath delay before the word "stay" in a narrative scene. The word no longer landed perfectly. It trembled. He did not understand how she knew to do that, but he felt the change in his chest, like an echo he had not realized was missing. She never spoke unnecessarily. She answered questions simply, declined compliments without discomfort, and never sought credit. And that, perhaps more than anything, unsettled him. One evening, in the observation corridor where soft lighting washed the walls in slow gradients of dusk, Elias passed her sitting beside Finn. The boy was explaining something about echoes, how they were like memories trying to come back. Clara did not correct him. She simply listened, eyes full of patience. He slowed, then stopped a few paces away, not close enough to interrupt, just to witness. She turned and saw him. Their eyes met for a moment. Not a smile, but something else, an acknowledgement. Elias nodded and moved on, but something inside him stayed behind, rooted in that quiet, wordless exchange. That night he went home and stared at the skyline through his seamless windows. The rain had carved faint lines down the glass. He did not wipe them away. Instead, he sat for a long time, wondering how long he had mistaken perfection for beauty, and realizing, perhaps for the first time, that silence could carry a melody of its own. The invitation came quietly, slipped into conversation over tea in the small meeting room that overlooked the testing atrium. Elias had begun meeting Clara there, never scheduled, never formal. Just brief intervals between development cycles, where he would bring 2 cups, one for her, untouched, and one for himself, though he rarely remembered to drink it. On this particular afternoon, the sky was gray in a softer way than usual, as if the rain had finally grown tired of being sharp. Clara sat on the edge of the couch, her posture as always both at ease and alert. Finn was off in a side corridor, watching a simulation of falling leaves loop endlessly, counting the seconds it took each to disappear. Elias stood by the window, arms loosely folded, gaze angled downward at nothing in particular. "I would like to help," he said. Clara raised her eyes from the worn sketchpad in her lap. "With what?" she asked, already wary of the tone behind his words. "Stability," Elias replied. "I have a property, several in fact. One of them is nearby, quiet, safe, not public. You and Finn could stay there, permanently if you wish." Clara stared at him for a long moment, then closed the sketchpad gently. "You mean live there?" "Yes, it is furnished, secure, no obligations, it would belong to you." "To us," she said, quietly correcting. "Yes, of course." She leaned back slightly, fingers tightening around the spine of the book. "Why?" she asked. Elias blinked. "Because you deserve better than a van parked beneath an overpass. Because Finn should not fall asleep listening for police patrols. Because I can." Clara exhaled, not with gratitude but tension. "Do you think this is what I need?" she asked. "A place handed to me like a data packet, a problem solved with a wire transfer." Elias took a step forward, confused but cautious. "No, I just—" "You fix things," she said, sharper now. "That is what you do. You find the flaw in the code, you isolate the line, and you correct it. But I am not a line of code, Elias." His mouth opened slightly, then closed. Clara stood, not defensive, but upright in her full height. Her presence filled the small room in a way that reminded him she was not delicate, no matter how soft her voice had always been. "I've spent years trying to keep my son and myself intact with nothing but what I could carry," she continued. "You think offering me a house is kindness, and maybe it is. But it also says something else. It says I cannot hold my own life anymore, that I need yours to make me whole." "That is not what I meant," Elias said, quiet, struggling. "It is not about making you whole. You already are." Clara's expression did not soften. "Then do not try to own my balance." The words hung between them, like a storm caught between thunder and release. He did not respond, not because he disagreed, but because something inside him recoiled, not from her, but from the unfamiliar terrain of rejection. Not of him as a person, but of the very framework he had built his identity on. Solve, perfect, control. Clara stepped closer, not to challenge, but to bridge. "I know you mean well," she said, softer now. "But helping someone stand is not the same as lifting them off the ground. I need to know I can still rise, on my own." Elias lowered his eyes. "I do not know how to help without fixing." "I know," she whispered, "and I do not know how to accept without fearing I will disappear inside what I am given." She turned to leave, but paused at the door. "When we can meet somewhere in the middle," she said, "try asking me what I need, not what you think I lack." Then she walked out, leaving Elias alone with a cooling cup of tea and the unfamiliar weight of not having the last move. It began with a door that should not have been open. Clara had been wandering the lab late one evening, unable to sleep. Finn was curled on their sofa back at the apartment, sketchpad in hand, dreaming in charcoal and stars. The hallways of Nexus, usually humming with activity, had gone still, just the soft buzz of low-energy lights and the occasional flicker of a security sensor. She had not intended to snoop, but the quiet had made her brave, and her feet carried her without thought. Then she saw it, a room she had never entered, marked only by a single letter etched into the matte black glass. Oh, the door was ajar, not wide, but enough to reveal a thread of light so dim it seemed more imagined than real. She hesitated, then stepped inside. The room was smaller than the other labs. No screens, no panels, no consoles, just a circular platform at the center and a single headset resting atop a black pedestal. No welcome interface, no index menu, just silence. Curious and wary, Clara approached. The headset was warm. She put it on. The transition was instant. She stood in an open field under a sky so blue it felt artificial. Grass swayed in a perfect rhythm, every blade identical in size and color, as if drawn from a mathematical equation. The wind was constant but measured. A single cloud drifted across the horizon in slow, deliberate motion, repeating its path like a looped animation. Trees stood at even intervals, equidistant, their branches never bending, never shedding a leaf. No animals, no human voice, no music. Just order. She walked for what felt like miles. The field never changed. There was no horizon, no sound of breath or bird. The sun hung in one fixed spot, never shifting. Even her footsteps made no mark on the ground. It was flawless and dead. Eventually, she found a structure, symmetrical, minimalist, built from translucent panels that caught the light in clean geometric precision. Inside, there were rooms. Each one contained a single object: a book with blank pages, a photograph with no faces, a piano with keys that played only one note, over and over. Clara's throat tightened. She removed the headset abruptly, the real world snapping back around her with a jolt. Her heart pounded, not with fear but grief. This was not a prototype for a game. It was something else. She looked around. No one had seen her. No cameras tracked her entrance. The room was unmarked in the central index, but she knew. This, was Elia's secret. A world built not for others, but for himself. And what frightened her was not the perfection she had seen. It was the loneliness that dripped from every faultless edge. Clara waited until the next morning. She found Elias in one of the upper conference levels, standing alone before a curved digital display. Lines of weather code shifted across the screen, simulating snowfall at varying altitudes. His eyes tracked the motion, but she could tell his mind was elsewhere, somewhere behind the stillness in his body, where thought outpaced action. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable as always. "You found it," he said simply. Clara's arms were crossed. She did not sit. "You left the door open." "No," he replied, "you walked through it." She moved toward the center of the room, placing herself directly in front of him. Her voice was quiet, but every word landed like a stone in still water. "That world you are building," she said, "the one behind the O, that is not a game. It is not art. It is an escape." Elias held her gaze. "It is control." She shook her head. "No, it is erasure." He flinched barely, but it was there, a flicker. "You say you want to perfect the way people feel," Clara continued. "But that world you built, it is sterile. Grief does not live there. Fear does not live there. Even joy, real joy, does not live there. Because joy without contrast is not joy. It is sedation." Elias' jaw tightened. "You saw the loop." "I felt the silence," she said. "The kind that smothers instead of soothes. You are not building a world. You are deleting everything that makes one necessary." "I am offering a choice," he countered. "A place without chaos, without damage." "No," she said, stepping closer now. "You are afraid of mess, of noise, of things you cannot fix." His voice lowered, not angry but raw. "Is that wrong?" "No," she said. "It is human. But Elias, if you build a place where no one ever suffers, then you are not healing them. You are making them forget they were ever alive." He turned from her, his breath shallow, hands flexing at his sides. "I do not know how to carry pain, Clara." "I know," she whispered. Silence stretched between them like glass. Finally he spoke, his voice so quiet it barely surfaced. "I thought if I could make something pure enough, it would be enough." "For whom?" she asked. "For them or for you?" He looked at her then, really looked, as if only in that moment did he see the distance he had created between himself and everything else, not by accident, but by design. "I cannot be what you want," he said. "I never asked you to be," she replied. "I only asked you to feel." She left before he could answer. And Elias, alone in the quiet hum of his perfection, did not return to the tower that night, nor the next. For the first time in years, he did not disappear into his code. He disappeared from himself. Clara did not make an announcement. She simply stopped showing up. Her credentials remained active. Her housing was still provided, but the observation rooms went quiet in her absence. The sound team noticed first. Their sessions felt colder, emptier. The avatar animation specialists were next, pausing over expressions they could no longer shape with nuance. Her touch was missing, like a rhythm line dropped from a score. Elias said nothing. He withdrew further into the isolated wing of the complex, into silence and data. His staff assumed he was working on something urgent, but the truth was, he was not working at all. He sat in the room labeled O. He returned night after night, walking the fields of his perfect world untouched by wind or time. But now it felt different. The quiet no longer comforted, it echoed, it scolded. Meanwhile, Clara stayed in the apartment. She did not speak of Elias, not to Finn, not even to herself. She walked to the edge of the bay most mornings, where the sea hissed against the stone wall and the wind pushed hard enough to sting her skin. She welcomed the sting. Finn noticed, he always noticed. He did not ask questions. He simply watched how his mother moved slower through rooms, how the music in her fingertips had grown still again. But unlike Elias, Finn did not vanish into silence. He began building. Using Nexus's beginner development interface, the same one he had watched interns use in the visitor center, he started crafting his own simulation. It was small, rough. The textures were borrowed from outdated archives. The characters were clunky, their movements stilted. But Finn gave them names. He gave them stories. He coded wind that sometimes blew too hard. He added thunder that came without lightning. A lake that overflowed when the moon was too full. And laughter. Laughter that looped imperfectly, echoing too long in valleys made of jagged pixels. He called it the not-so-big world. When Clara found it, accidentally, while scanning Finn's tablet for drawing files, she froze. "What is this?" she asked gently. Finn shrugged, a little shy. "It's just something I made, for you, for him too maybe, I dunno, it's kind of messy." Clara sat down beside him. She watched a low-resolution character fall off a swing and laugh about it. She saw a house that had one too many windows and a tree that blinked blue when it rained. She felt, for the first time in weeks, a warmth gather in her chest. It was beautiful. Not because it was refined, but because it was flawed, alive. Later that evening, Finn uploaded it quietly into the Nexus server under a miscellaneous test folder, where it would not attract attention. Except it did. Elias found it 3 days later, while tracing system errors from a code sweep. He opened it expecting broken scripts or forgotten builds. Instead, he stepped into a world with laughter and thunder and crooked shadows. A world that felt more real than anything he had ever built. And in the middle of it all, a line of text written in unsteady code. "Nothing's perfect, but you can still like it." Elias stood in that world for a long time. And for the first time since Clara left, he closed his eyes and smiled. Elias entered the simulation without expectation. The file had been buried in a subfolder named misc/fin test v3, mislabeled by the system and overlooked by QA. He had only opened it to complete a purge, an automatic scan for unused assets. But the moment the simulation loaded, something caught him off guard. The world was small, clumsy even. The rendering resolution was low and the physics engine behaved strangely. Grass swayed even when there was no wind, and characters blinked at odd intervals. One tree shimmered blue when the sun touched it. A hill in the distance trembled when the rain fell. And yet it lived. The environment was filled with contradictions. A single cloud hovered above a cottage where a crooked chimney leaned too far to the left. The mailbox outside made little noises when touched. The river ran uphill for no reason and sometimes stopped mid-flow to ripple without source. Elias walked forward, no instructions, no objective. Just presence. He moved through a valley where the light changed depending on how fast he breathed. He knelt beside a patch of tulips that pulsed in and out of tune, like they were humming with anxiety. He entered a small house with 4 chairs and 3 windows, 2 of the chairs mismatched, the third child-sized. The floor creaked too loudly. He laughed softly and involuntarily. It was absurd, inefficient, chaotic, and utterly beautiful. In the corner of the living room he noticed a tiny figure. It was poorly rigged, with limbs too short and a head that bobbed slightly off balance. But its eyes, they blinked with delay, not perfectly, not mechanically, like it was thinking. Elias knelt down and clicked on it. The figure lifted a small hand and said, in Finn's recorded voice, "This is for when the silence is too loud." Then it laughed. And then it glitched, froze mid-motion. But somehow the moment held. Elias lowered the headset slowly. His chest felt tight, but not from discomfort, not from stress or pressure or calculations unresolved. It was something older than that, something he had not let touch him in years. Tears came quietly, as if they had been waiting. He did not resist them. He sat there, alone in the dark of his high-rise lab, rain trickling softly down the glass outside, and wept into his hands. Not just for the beauty of the world Finn had made, not just for its flaws, but for what it exposed in him. That in all his years of chasing perfection, he had forgotten what it felt like to be held by imperfection and still be safe, still be loved. He did not wipe his face. Instead, he stood, walked to the console, and saved the simulation under a new name. The Realist Place. Tagged with 2 creators, Finn Bellwether and Clara. It was nearly evening when Clara heard the knock. Soft twice, then nothing. The apartment was quiet. Finn was in the next room, humming under his breath as he layered colors onto another page of his endless sketchbook. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the window, the sky folding into its dusky gray. Clara opened the door. Elias stood there, not in the black coat she had come to associate with his sleek precision, but something simpler. A wool jacket slightly frayed at the cuffs. His hair was damp from the weather. He looked tired, not disheveled, not broken, just real. She said nothing. Neither did he, not at first. "I found the simulation," he said finally, "the one Finn made." Her expression did not change, but something behind her eyes shifted. He saw it. "I walked through it," he continued. "The grass, the sky, the strange river, the laughing mailbox, all of it." She stepped aside silently and he entered, not like a man reclaiming something, like a man requesting shelter from himself. "I was wrong," Elias said, his voice low. "Not about the project, about everything around it. I thought if I could remove the pain, I could fix the world, but I see it now. It is not about erasing the noise. It is about learning to hear the music inside it." Clara watched him. She did not rush to answer. Then quietly, "What are you asking me, Elias?" He looked at her, truly looked, not through the lens of what she could offer, not as a consultant or a curiosity or a window into emotion, but as someone who had helped him remember how to feel. "I want to build something real," he said. "Not perfect, not seamless, something that can carry contradiction, weight, laughter, grief, joy that stumbles, healing that takes time." He paused, took a breath. "But I cannot build it alone. Would you help me?" It was not a plea. It was a question offered like a hand left open, palm up, not pulling her forward, just waiting. Clara stood still. Then she nodded, once. No dramatic music, no sweeping kiss, just recognition, quiet and full. Finn peeked around the corner, sensing the shift in the room. He tilted his head. "Did he come to apologize?" he whispered. Clara smiled, not wide but enough. "No," she said, "he came to listen." Elias knelt beside Finn, his voice soft. "And I came to ask if I could help build your world, if you will let me." Finn considered this for a long moment. Then shrugged. Okay, but the tulips still hum weird. That part stays, Elias replied. They're my favorite now. The three of them sat together in the soft light of the kitchen. Not perfect, not finished, but beginning again with open eyes. The building stood quietly at the edge of the city, tucked between an old brick bakery and a shuttered bookstore. No neon sign, no grand facade, just a modest plaque beside the entrance, etched in understated letters. The residence room. Inside, nothing gleamed. There were no sterile surfaces, no clinical white. Instead, warm wood lined the walls. Soft light filtered through tall windows. Plants, real ones, grew in the corners. Scuff marks lived in the floorboards. And in the center of it all stood a cello, worn and golden, resting upright as if it had been waiting for years to return home. Clara had played it on opening day. No grand speech, just a single, unbroken note that filled the space like breath, low, resonant, imperfect. The guests, most of them quiet or skeptical or visibly fragile, had stopped and listened. Not because they were told to, but because something inside them stirred. The resonance room was not just a center, it was a bridge. One wing offered immersive therapy using custom-built VR modules, designed by Elias, shaped by Clara, tested by Finn. People could step into memory without being drowned by it, walk through fields that knew how to grieve, sit in a version of their childhood kitchen and forgive the silence. Nothing was pushed. There were no levels to complete, no rewards. Only reflection and presence. In another room there was music. Clara taught cello again, not formally, not with technique, but with feeling. Let the bow tremble, she would say. That is where the honesty lives. Some students had never held an instrument before. Others simply came to listen. Upstairs, Finn had a workshop. Paper and wires and bright plastic parts were scattered across every surface. He designed small, feeling machines, toys that laughed when held too tightly, or boxes that whispered back whatever someone was afraid to say aloud. He called them echo catchers. Elias kept his office in the back. It was the smallest room in the building. No interface wall, just a desk, a shelf of paper notebooks, and a plant Finn had insisted he name. He no longer monitored everything. He no longer disappeared into code. Instead, he met with guests, listened to their feedback, sometimes just sat beside them in quiet. Word spread slowly. A woman who had not spoken in months began humming again. A teenage boy rebuilt the forest from his grandfather's stories. A man with tremors learned to play a four-note melody and wept afterward because it made him feel young. There were no advertisements, no press tour, no IPOs. But there was healing. And in the cracks of every simulation, every soundscape, every unpolished moment, something bloomed. Not perfection. Connection. The room was quiet except for the rain. It tapped gently against the high windows, weaving its rhythm into the wood-paneled space with a patience only rain possesses. Outside, the city shimmered in soft focus, misty and gray, but alive. Inside, under the curve of the vaulted ceiling, the world had slowed to the tempo of breath. Elias sat on a stool that creaked slightly beneath him, a cello awkwardly balanced between his knees. His posture was rigid, every muscle in his back fighting against the natural curves of the instrument. He held the bow as if it were made of glass and danger, and for the third time in 10 minutes produced a sound that could only be described as determinedly awful. Finn, seated cross-legged on the rug, tried not to laugh but failed. Less like a robot, he said, grinning, more like a river. Elias looked down at the cello, baffled. Rivers are chaotic. Finn shrugged, exactly. Clara stood at the far end of the room, leaning against the doorway with her arms folded, a half-smile on her lips. She had said nothing since they began. She just watched the man who once tried to erase imperfection now struggle to make music with it. Elias tried again. The note he played was still clumsy, still off, but this time it wavered in a way that sounded almost human. Finn clapped softly. There, he said, That's a good mistake. Elias looked up puzzled. Is that a thing? In this room it is, Finn replied. Clara chuckled under her breath. Elias turned toward her not with embarrassment but quiet gratitude. His eyes found hers and she nodded once as if to say, "You are learning. Keep going." The light outside began to dim, the rain deepening into a steady whisper. Clara crossed the room, sat beside Finn and wrapped an arm around his small shoulders. Elias straightened, adjusted his grip and tried another note. This time it resonated, low, imperfect but warm. They did not speak. There was no applause, just the cello's soft hum and the rain beyond the glass their symphony. It was not perfect, but it was real. And it was enough.